The Tower of Babel has always been the subject of much speculation and curiosity on the part of the people, and many people don't know what the Bible really talks about it, and ends up believing in reports that have no biblical base. But in this video, we will know a little more about the Babel Tower in the light of the Bible. Even the expression of Babel does not appear in the Old Testament, but is the name popularly adopted to refer to the tower of the city of Babel. The word tower basically means watchman tower, while the word Babel comes from Babel and means God's gate for the combination of the Babakadian with the Hebrew L. But the name Babel is also explained by popular etymology based on a similar Hebrew root that means confusion and mixing, and has phonetic relations with the word Babel. It is certain that the name Babel became synonymous with the place of God's judgment, where there was the confusion of tongues and the beginning of idioms. But before we start talking about the Tower of Babel, we need to talk a little about the city of Babel. After the flood, God commanded man to spread and populate the earth. But, contrary to God's order, that population decided to unify, building a city in the Shinar Plain. The city of Babel is the first city mentioned in the Bible after the flood, and the region where Babel was built later became the so famous Babylon. And the city of Babel was founded by Nimrod, who also founded the cities of Erech, Akkad, and Calneh. And when Nimrod left for Syria, he still built other cities, among which was the city of Nineveh. And by the biblical account of chapter 11 of the book of Genesis, possibly Babel was the first headquarters of the government of Nimrod, and where his kingdom began. But along with the Babel building, those people also started building a tower to fortify the city. And that was a completely contrary attitude to God's will, because the construction of the Tower Babel basically meant the materialization of the refusal of God's command to spread and populate the earth. The expression applied to the Tower of Babel, whose summit touches the heavens, perfectly demonstrates the pride of that civilization, as well as the technological advance that humanity had already achieved at that time. The text of Genesis chapter 11 does not clarify whether these people were afraid of a new flood, but the city's structure, the grandeur of their tower, and the insistence of a fully integrated society seem to indicate such a condition. If this is really what happened, then this behavior, besides characterizing disobedience to God, also exposed the lack of confidence in the promise the Lord had made. Because God had promised that the earth would never be destroyed by a flood. But how was the Tower of Babel built at that time? In the region of Babel, there were no stones that could be used as bricks, nor lime to be used as mortar. Then many buildings in that region were built with dried clay bricks in the sun or prepared in ovens. And the foundation of the buildings were also made of steppe clay, and the bitumen was used as mortar. The well-known Mesopotamian towers, called ziggurati, are used as references to understand how the shape of the Babel Tower was like. These towers were rectangular, built at levels, and accessible by stairs and ramps. They had a courtyard that gave access to the second floor, and other stairs, usually external, led to the top of the tower. Usually these towers had 3 levels, but there are indications of ziggurats with up to 7 levels. At the top of the tower, there was a sanctuary where the image of the divinity honored by the building of the ziggurat was. But these are just parameters. But we don't know how many levels the Babel Tower had, nor is it possible to know if in the Tower of Babel there was the function of sanctuary, because probably its building was unfinished along with the city itself when the inhabitants were dispersed. Similarly, it is also not known exactly where the Tower of Babel was built. Only the region where the city was, that is known. Because of this, there are some suggestions for the tower site. Some interpreters agree with the tradition transmitted by Jews and Arabians that the Tower of Babel was Nabu's temple, about 16 kilometers south of Babylon. This temple tower had 7 levels, and the main defense of this suggestion is that the name of this tower is possibly a variation of an expression that means Nimrod Tower. The second suggestion argues that the Tower of Babel was located in the city of Babylon and would be a well-known ziggurat whose name means the house of the foundation of heaven and earth. This construction was like a pyramid with steps. It was approximately 100 meters high. This construction was known in antiquity as the Tower of Babylon. And the inhabitants from that empire, they believed that the god worshipped by them descended in the tower temple to have contact with them. Subsequently, this tower was destroyed by Xerxes, and its rubble was probably removed by inhabitants from the region, and on site was only a huge crater. Other scholars argue that the Tower of Babel was west of Baghdad, Iraq. But this possibility is not much considered, especially because the city located in that region was built only in 400 BC. There is still a Jewish tradition that believes God sent fire from the sky and consumed the entire Tower of Babel, including his foundations, and it is impossible to locate it. And there is also another tradition that states that the Tower of Babel may have been overthrown by the force of the wind and that nothing is left of it. But if, on the one hand, it is not known exactly where the Tower of Babel was, on the other hand, it is possible to know the main information about it. Both the city of Babel and its tower represent concrete forms the ambition of man since the earliest times. The Tower of Babel is a clear figure of the human insistence to disobey the Lord's orders. The most important biblical message about the Tower of Babel concerns the judgment of God that came upon that people, bringing the confusion of tongues and beginning the geographical dispersion of humanity, and the emergence of the various cultures and idioms. And in Genesis 11, verse 5, one can see an anthropomorphic element in the descent of God, to see the city and the tower that men were building in Babel. And in Genesis 11, verse 6, God then brought judgment over that people and spread him all over the earth. There is also a discussion if the confusion of languages was a global or local evento. Some scholars argue that such an event occurred only within the Semitic history. Therefore, they understand that. And so, soon the confusion of the tongues would have originated different dialects only among the Semites. But this interpretation is quite contested. The most accepted interpretation of Genesis chapter 11 is that the confusion of languages had a global impact. This means that humanity was concentrated there in Babel. So, before that, everyone spoke the same language, which seems clear to the light of verses 1 and 6 of chapter 11 of the book of Genesis. Then it is possible that the author of Genesis used a method of text organization and construction where the first part of chapter 11 chronologically precedes chapter 10. This means that in chapter 10 it emphasizes Noah's descent and geographical divisions, while in chapter 11 he demonstrates how such divisions occurred with the dispersion of the human race. And finally, many people try to speculate what was the language spoken before the confusion of tongues in Babel. But this is another unanswered question. In fact, it is not known what the initial language was before the confusion of tongues in the Tower of Babel. Some scholars even suggest that this language was Hebrew, but there is no reasoning to defend this possibility, especially because the Hebrew language itself was originated from other dialects, and that is all that really is known about the Tower of Babel.
As we conclude this spiritual exploration on Path of Faith, we invite you to engage with us by leaving your comments, liking this video, sharing it with others, and subscribing to our channel for regular doses of uplifting messages.